Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so appreciative that you've joined us this afternoon for the Mothering Spaces Symposium. My name is Carolyn Jervis, and I'm the director of the Mitchell Art Gallery. Before we start today, I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather, in Treaty 6 territory, is the traditional gathering place for many Indigenous people. We honor and respect the history, languages, ceremonies, and culture of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who call this territory home. The First Peoples' connection to the land teaches us about our inherent responsibility to protect and respect Mother Earth. With this acknowledgement, we honor the ancestors and children who have been buried here, missing and murdered Indigenous women and men, and the process of ongoing collective healing for all human beings. We are reminded that we are all treaty people and of the responsibility we have to one another. So our program today is part of the Mothering Spaces exhibition, which is guest curated by Becca Taylor. It's been really fortunate to work with Becca on this project. I've really admired the work that she's done across the country, and it's been really wonderful to work with her over this past year. And I want to express my deep appreciation as well to the Alberta Foundation for the Arts for the project grant that helped make this exhibition and its related programming possible. Just a couple quick housekeeping things before we get started to help make your time with us this afternoon as comfortable as possible. If you're looking for washrooms, they're over to my right here. If you're looking for an all-gender washroom, there's one down this hallway here all the way to the left. There's coffee and tea and water behind me here, well, in front of me and behind you, I should say. And if you're here with children, that's wonderful. Thank you for bringing them. There is coloring in the gallery, and there are some giveaway bags that Faye Heavy Shield has kindly made. So if any of that is helpful, please feel free to access that, and any way your children want to participate today is great. I just wanted to let you know we have one more program this weekend. So on Sunday at 1:30 in the Betty Andrews Recital Hall, which is right behind us here, Otsitsi-Wan Contemporary Art Collective is presenting a film screening and panel discussion on Indigenous birthing practices with films by the Ephemeris, Jules Kustachin and Rebecca Tebo-Bondung. There will be a panel discussion with some of the filmmakers and members of the Indigenous Birthing Collective of Alberta, and it's moderated by Tiffany Shaw-Collinge. If you aren't able to join us tomorrow, we're going to be doing an extended screening of 3 of those films on the monitors right until March 30th. So please come back another time if that is more convenient for you. To stay in the loop with what we're doing at the gallery, please check out our e-newsletter. You can sign up for it at MacEwan.ca/Mitchell Art Gallery. And also, Becca is doing a curator's tour of the exhibition on Thursday, March 31st at 7 p.m. So that's all the housekeeping things. And so now is my I have the pleasure of welcoming up the moderator for our first panel, Becca Taylor. Please join me in welcoming her.
Can I also get the panelists up here too? That'd be great. Thanks everyone for coming out and joining us tonight. I'm really excited to have all the wonderful artists in town with us and to be able to share some conversation with you guys. And we're going to talk for a little bit first. I have a few questions for them, but we're going to be opening it up, the floor to the audience for questions a little bit later on. So please feel free to ask questions. And yeah, so I'll just introduce everyone quickly. I'm Becca Taylor. I'm the guest curator here. It's been such a pleasure working within this space, and such a pleasure working with such incredible artists who have been so open and welcoming to this conversation, and I really appreciate all of your time. So joining us on stage, we have, down on the other side from me, Tiffany Shaw-Collinge. Is an interdisciplinary artist, curator, and intern architect based in Alberta. She holds a BFA from Nova Scotia College of Art and Design University, a master's in architecture from the Southern California Institute of Architecture, and is currently working at Manask Isaac.
Manask Isaac.
Thank you, Architects. Shaw-Collinge has exhibited widely, including the Architecture Venice Biennial, the Art Gallery of Alberta, Winnipeg Art Gallery, and Pier 21 in Halifax. She has been the recipient of a major commission for Edmonton's fourth, or I guess it's open now, Indigenous Art Park, which is very beautiful. You guys should all go check it out. And has produced several notable transitory artworks and is a core member of the MacEwan Contemporary Art Collective. Then we have 2/3 of the Ephemerals joining us on stage. So I'll just introduce the collective first and then introduce their independent practices. So the Ephemerals are a collective of Aboriginal women from Winnipeg, Manitoba, interested in curatorial and creative-based research and film. The collective was established to function as an outlet to foster and motivate artistic production, both within their individual practices, as well as to engage in collaborative projects that revolve around Indigenous contemporary art. Their focus is on Indigenous culture within a political and social context, responding to contemporary issues. The Ephemerals draw inspiration from their combined curatorial, multidisciplinary art practices and mixed cultural backgrounds. The collective's projects are fueled by collaborative interventions, the ephemeral affairs, in order to push the boundaries of perceived indigeneity. Their work in performance and film exhibits an ethereal aesthetic that is transformative and often fleeting based on current interests, the spirit of the times, and what compels them to respond to contemporary visual and material culture. So right next to me we have Jaimie Isaac, who is an interdisciplinary artist and Indigenous curator, resident at the Winnipeg Art Gallery, member of Seguin First Nation. Jaimie holds a degree in art history and an arts and culture management certificate from the University of Winnipeg and an MA at the University of British Columbia. And Jenny Western, who's sitting in the middle here, is a freelance curator, writer, and educator based in Winnipeg, Manitoba, member of Brothertown Nation in Wisconsin, and holds an undergraduate degree in history from the University of Winnipeg and a master's in art history and curatorial practices from York University in Toronto. So thank you for joining us today. We've been able to have some really great conversations over this week as we've been installing, and I was kind of hoping that you guys could, my first question, maybe this is a bit of a big question that's hard to define, but I'm just wondering if you guys could speak to or define what the term mothering means to you, and how does that fit within your work?
I thought when you asked that earlier in the week, I was thinking, oh, okay, what does it mean to be a mother, or how do I identify myself as a mother? I was a bit kind of thinking through that and thinking through our practice as a collective with the Ephemerals, but also as a mom. And the first thing I did was call my mom and be like, Mom, how do you identify as a mom? And I think that was really important to do that because my mom and her mom attended residential schools, and I think that my mother's mother, my grandmother, has really thought through this about how being taken, going to residential schools basically took her away from her mother, and didn't really understand or get taught the way that she wanted to or needed to by her mother. And so that sort of residual intergenerational impact affected my mother and their relationship. And growing up, my mom always put me in every single thing that she could possibly do because she wasn't afforded those opportunities. So piano lessons to to skating, to snowboarding, to all of these things that she just kind of pushed us into, and that was amazing. And I really think that what that instilled and what my mom really wanted to do or be as a mother is be unconditional. And so I practiced being unconditional to my son, and tried to do that with my mother and her mother, and sort of think about unconditionalness in a way that approaches the way that I also think about myself and my practice as an artist and as a practice as a mother. So I think that I really have learned a lot from that kind of intergenerational passing and on of reciprocity that way. And I think that the ephemerals really talk through that in different ways in our practice. And I could go on and on about that, I think, so I'll stop there.
I think being part of the ephemerals has really affected how I see myself as a mother. And I've said this before, and I'm sure I will say it again, but I don't think I would be a mother had I not been part of this group. I was able to see a model of what being a mother and an artist, Indigenous feminist looked like, and I could identify with that, whereas I was seeing examples of motherhood other places that I didn't quite identify with. Some background, we all had children in 2012. We all have 6-year-olds now. I've often joked that the ephemerals is actually just a mom's group, because I didn't want to be part of any other kind of mom's group. But I could be part of this mom's group where when we got together with our kids, we would talk about the project we want to work on, the art we wanted to make. We want to talk about our ancestors, our mothers, our grandmothers, our aunties, in a way that felt comfortable and nourishing and enlightening and encouraging as a mother. And still to this day, you know, we just this week we're talking about how to do the work, to stretch yourself as a curator, an artist, what have you, and still provide for your children what they need and for yourself what you need. And it's great to have that community to talk about, to be available to, and then to come out of that and make artwork as well, and a group that understands when you need to bring your child along or you can't make the meeting because your kid is sick or what have you. So that's been a real, I think, it's been a big part about how I see myself as a mother, as being part of this group. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
It's like the best mom's group ever. Yeah, I really admire it. I think I had resisted becoming a mother for so long. It was something I never really saw in my future. But at a certain point, I just became to realize that it was something that I wanted to do. I actually had a miscarriage, and I think in that miscarriage, I had realized that I actually did want to be a mother, and it wasn't something that I had come to the full realization until I had lost that child. And so that was really good for me for the process of when I actually did have Jasper. He's just turned 3. And that whole process was really a great growing moment for me because this is like super personal, but I've never met my father. And whenever I would talk about when I was pregnant, I'd be like, well, you know, perhaps I'll love him, perhaps, you know, we'll grow up and perhaps this will be a good relationship. And I never realized it was because I was projecting that relationship of not being accepted by my other parent my entire life, that I was projecting that onto my process as a parent. And then it was kind of amazing because I was so terrified about the actual birth experience that after I delivered him, which was a really beautiful birth, thank goodness, I was like showing him in the hallway down, like I was in a wheelchair, and I was like, this is my baby, like I just did this. It was like, it just kind of like really opened my world in a way that I never realized that I was completely denying myself of. And it gave me all of this power that I didn't realize that I had in terms of certainty, knowingness, self-care. Also, it gave me security, because I didn't realize how insecure I was in my decisions, especially like being in architecture, for example. The authority to think that I can design something that can last for generations was a really terrifying thing. But then when I just felt like, I don't know, it's like this portal opened, and it really helped me become much more self-secure than I had ever realized. And so, while I did love my life before, I just have much more meaning now. And it's only because he helped bring that to me, it was a gift that I never knew that I really wanted. And what I try to do is think about being a caregiver, because my mother also looks after my nieces and nephews. So we just kind of collectively caregive those children, and then one of them lives with me now. It's just a way of, so they, you know, my nieces and nephews, they have parents, and we always try to respect them, but we also try to help them in their journey too. So I try to think about motherhood as a collective thing, because I'm very grateful for my grandmother and my mother and my aunts and all they've taught me. So in my personal artwork, I just try and incorporate my nieces and nephews and Jasper as much as possible. So like if I'm installing a silver mylar piece, like he'll be crinkling the paper with me so that he's a part of it in the sound and the process too. And then I call it free labor, but I'll bring my nieces and nephews over and I'll make them help install work, because then they can be part of the decision-making process too, so that they can also gain those fine distinctions between what looks good and what makes it look better, and so that they can learn those processes earlier than instead of going to school all the time. So, because maybe they won't go to art school either, so if I can just slip that in.
Yeah, I've witnessed you with your nieces and nephew within this space, and I just really love and admire like how much you do include them in that process, like, and just ask them questions and give them a chance to think things through. And then that also echoes in your guys' work as well, being with you guys when you were, I just realized how lucky I was. I got to be with you guys when you were filming Afterbirth, even though I feel like Luella didn't want to hang out with me that much, but which is fine. I'm not holding any grudges. Like, it was just really incredible to see your guys' process too, like when you became mothers, how included the little ones are in your practice and how actively present they are in each of your obviously your lives, but you know, like how present they are in each of your performative actions, like and how present they are in the arts community. Like I feel like everybody knows your kids and they're just like an active presence, and I think it's really beautiful. I was just wondering if you guys can speak a little bit more to this like collectivity behind mothering. Like, I just love this idea, and I know I have my own experiences with this as well, but I'd like to hear how that has impacted your work, this collectivity.
Well, I think I always go back to my matriarchs in my family, and I remember really having anxiety when James was first born, my son, and thinking, okay, I'm so nervous about being a mom, but I think I can do this. I think I can keep him alive. And also know that I have 2 friends and colleagues that are going through the same thing, that have babies, and that was really comforting, as Jenny was saying. But also having anxiety about not being able to have an arts career anymore, and sort of thinking like, okay, is that part of me then done? And you know, like that sort of anxiety of energies and where they're going and what I can focus on. And I remember being invited to some talks and some residencies around reconciliation and the work that I was doing prior to having James. And I was really nervous about like bringing my son with me to these talks, and my mom was like, well, it's about reconciliation, and you know, reconciliation is about thinking about the past and the future and relationships and community. And how can you think about the future without, you know, having your little one present there with you? So having, you know, that really helped me kind of get over some anxieties, and having a really amazing arts community in that specific community of going to the residencies. So I just brought him, and I remember sitting on a panel, and he was 5 months, just 5 months old. And it was like, I just brought him on and kind of jiggling him while other people were talking. And then when I talked, it passed him down the panel. And so this baby was like traveling on this panel. And it was pretty amazing, because it was about, I think the topic was imagining reconciliation. And I think that was really powerful in terms of thinking about collectivity and trusting other people to hold your baby while you're talking, even though when I talked, he wanted to talk louder. So I don't know if anyone actually heard me talk. But and then I think, just feeling a kind of cultural safety, or almost like a feminist safety net with colleagues and friends and family that sort of just takes on the role if you needed to, have a shower and want to look nice, like this morning. James is like, I want to go see Charlie. So it was just it's nice to be able to have that kind of flexibility and trust around a larger net of people, and to disregard the kind of Western idea of a nuclear family and having to do it all by yourself, because I can't imagine being able to go to these residencies or writing essays or like putting exhibitions together without my mom, without my nana, without my colleagues, with friends and little ones. So I think that it really helps to be able to succeed in a good way.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that, especially about the nuclear family. So the one thing that my bio doesn't say is that aside from being an independent curator and writer, educator, I have this year been a full-time stay-at-home homeschooling mom, which is, yeah, I know, right? It's great to spend that much time with my kids and to be able to see them growing up, but it is also incredibly isolating and lonely as a mom to be at home in your house with your kids. And I don't think that's how it's supposed to be, because we have these chances when we work as a collective to be together, or when we go and travel and be on residency like this, and work together as three women with kids, with other support there too. That to me feels so good and natural. We did a project at the University of Regina, which I'm sure we'll talk of a little bit more. It was sort of like our lowest and highest moments almost at the same time. But for me personally, there was a moment that just clicked so much, where we decided, we're going to have to figure out how to do this work and take care of these kids, and we have to divide and conquer. So all of the work is the work, the mothering work, the artwork, all of it is fitting together here. It's all on the same table. So two of us go and we do, the pancake art project or the screen art project, and one of us is over with the three kids. And it was so lovely to operate like that. I'd never had a chance to work like that before, where the motherhood, the artwork, all of it together, and also a feeling of like these kids all as a brood. I remember someone pointing to James and saying, whose kid is that? And I was like, mine. No, Jaimie's. But they all were our kids, and we were all working together as women, as a collective. And I really do feel, after having spent a year just kind of more alone and solitary with my kids, that it is supposed to be about mothers together, helping each other, raising kind of a flock of kids, and how good that is for kids to be together. And that collectivity, it's golden. It's really great. And that this collective that we've built as the three of us has helped us to do that, but also coming together in this exhibition too. And at the opening, it's just this group of kids running up and down and all around, playing with Jasper and other kids that came. It's super lovely to see. It's so nice that these kids will have that memory of coming to these art openings, and the fun and the community that will come with that, I think, is really important. And that's collectivity for us and collectivity for the kids. That's great. It's really encouraging.
Yeah, well, even Brenda's trap line here, because I've taken Jasper here to this building before, but when I brought them here to the opening, I saw everyone walking the line, and you incorporated it, of course, as part of your beautiful performance. But I love that this building is also a great place to play, too. And then I just love how they navigate this line naturally. So that was really lovely to see. But I think, what was the question exactly again?
Like collectivity with the mothering, and how that has impacted or worked its way into your life, or if it has at all.
Well, I think what I really love about the family that I live in is that there are so many of us. And so it's kind of nice to see how everyone experiences bringing up Jasper differently. So whenever I bring him to an art opening for Otitsi one, for example, I just know that he's already welcomed there, and that obviously I won't usually be watching him all the time, but then Aaron will go grab him, or Becca will go grab him, and I think, or we'll be a DC3, and then Michelle will help him touch all of the cheese and not tell anybody. And so I think to me, that really feels like community, and it feels like I belong. And I think that's what's really powerful about that communal effect, is that everyone belongs together, and also that there aren't these hard and fast rules about what is good and bad behavior. Because when people just sort of make it happen and make it work, and that's what's nice about being a parent, especially when you're first learning how to do that, is just you have to learn how to be flexible and just like accept that you can't put them in these kinds of clothes all the time that you want them to be in, because then they peed through them or vomited all over you. And so I think it's, you just start to accept these things and then just know that sometimes it's not as important to be so perfect, or that you can make things so perfect. And then there's always this realm of forgiveness or acceptability, or just like, does it really matter? And I think that is what helps grow those relationships together too. But one thing I also love too is bringing Jasper with me everywhere, because I can then see another point of view that I hadn't been open to before. And so then I find that the conversations are more stronger, because then people are thinking about, well, we say 7 generations, of course, but people are thinking more thoughtfully about the future and the past. And so I find that when he's in the room, things happen differently than they would ordinarily. So I just find those richer conversations. So if I can always just bring him, then that will be better. And so like I got the Public Art Commission for the Indigenous Art Park like just 10 days after Jasper was born. So I had a thorough amount of research in my proposal. So I would just call the Royal Alberta Museum and ask if I could bring him, and they would say yes. They drew the line though at me changing his diaper on the table, so that was good to know. But like I could bring him, or I'd bring him to the archives, and then they just let him sleep in the library. And that for me was really important, because I didn't feel like I wanted to do this without him, but I also felt like people really made the space for him to be there so I could be there, and that they didn't want to separate those lives. So I actually found a whole new world that I didn't know existed that was much more supportive than I even realized. So from it was the archivist that let me come in and let him sleep in the library was amazing, to my grandmother making sure that he has all he needs when I'm in the room or something like that. So it's just kind of interesting that way.
Well, like when we first met each other, and I was going to this meeting, and I had to bring my infant son with me, and I was a little nervous. I hadn't done that before, and I walked in the room, and here's Tiffany and her infant son already there. It was such an incredible experience to be like, oh, there's already a mom and kid here. There's 2 of us. Wow, we've already got this little community, and to sit together and have the babies interact while this like serious meeting was happening. It was nice to have that balance.
Yeah, well, one thing I learned too early on was that, well, one thing that was reinforced, specifically at the residency at the BAM Center, was that when you're going to like a Native event, there are always going to be kids there. So like that you're not alone. So I always kind of like do this self-evaluation checklist, like where am I going, and is Jasper coming with me? And then I know for sure, like if it's a Native event, I know for sure he's always just welcome, and that he likely won't be the only person there. So I think there's always I just always know that, because it's been so reinforced.
You knew we were coming.
Well, I didn't know you were coming with your baby, but it made me so much happier, because then it made me feel stronger in my position and not the only person who was going to be making very strange sounds with like vomit and stuff. So
Did we change babies on the table though? We should have taken
no,
them.
I didn't. But they did take the Winnipeg Arts Council, I can't remember her name again.
It's probably Tamara, because she's
Tamara.
also a mother.
Jasper just started learning how to scream, so like involuntary screaming. And I was with these like really established artists and I was I'm still new in my career, and he was just screaming through these presentations, and then he just started getting untenable, and Tamara, one of the staff, just like took him away and like made him fall asleep so that I could just focus on the presentation and like understand what was going on, and that was like amazing. So like those things are really important.
Yeah, I think this kind of actually leads really well into my next question, because I'm wondering if you guys are willing to share some of the like structural boundaries you've been in place, or we were talking about these invisible borders last night, like these challenges you face as a mother within the institution, or within these spaces, and maybe speak, if you're comfortable, a little bit to those experiences, and maybe give us some insight on how we could be a little bit more supportive of you bringing your children within these spaces.
think it changes on their age, for sure. I remember going to an artist talk with two senior established artists, and lots of people were there, and they were really excited. And there was a new mom who had walked with her stroller all the way from her house to the gallery, this little baby, and just kind of stood at the edge of everything because she really wanted to be there for this artist talk and hear, but her baby was making some noise, not terribly loud, but making some noise. And a board member came over and said to her, "Can you please leave with your baby? Can you take your baby outside? This is distracting people." And I don't like conflict, but I was like, that's not cool. These artists we're here to see were babies once. We were all babies once. We were all kids once. We're all part of this community. How do we make space for this mom? She wants to be here so bad that she walked down here, it was probably winter, pushing a stroller in order to hear these artists. So how do we do that? So I ended up, like following up with emails and talking to other board members and saying, like, we got to find a solution. And in that case, they were able to say, well, maybe we can say we don't want people to feel distracted, but we do want moms and babies to feel comfortable, and welcome. And I think in that case, they were able to set up like an audio situation where at least if a mom felt like she had to take the baby out, she could go into the gift shop and hear the talk still happening. But, that was just like one little tiny beginning. And just the audacity of sort of saying like, well, you got to get out because you're here with your baby, and not recognizing the effort that she had put in just to show up, on her own with a tiny baby was appalling to me that's how the art scene was. And there do need to be some solutions to that. But again, that's different once they're a little older. I think our kids were just thrilled to see like coloring books here for them laid out, and the giveaway that Faye planned was such a delight for them. These little gestures that make them feel welcome when they're a little older, I think that does go a long way, and that they're not scolded. My daughter, it's ingrained in me too, I have to say. My daughter wanted to touch Faye's drums that are in there, and I was like, oh, no, don't touch them. And Faye came over right away and was like, yes, you can touch them, of course. Please
That same
touch
thing
them.
happened to Jasper too.
Yeah.
So he was about to touch them, and then it was really nice because my employer, she came and she was like, oh, Jasper, don't touch those. And Faye was like, Jasper can touch those. That's a big thing. Or the blankets too. They could play with the blankets and stuff like that. I think you just have to ask. I think that's the most important thing, or just like normalize it, because even at my full-time job too, as an architect, in that environment, I'm able to bring Jasper at any time if I need to, and other people do that as well. It's just a normalized environment to have dogs or children in the office. And I think that I know that is not everywhere in this city. And I think one of our coworkers brought her daughter for the entire summer to work in the office because she couldn't find childcare. And no one knew, because she was the quietest child, but that didn't matter. But it was just that was just what she needed to do. She just had to bring her child in, and then sometimes I think we had 6 kids in the office last summer for a couple days, and it just wasn't a big deal. And I did hear some people complaining about a baby being in the office. And we just had to have some discussions with him about his perspective and let him know that this is the kind of environment where this does happen. And so if this is where he doesn't want to be, then he doesn't need to be here. It's not that the other people leave. And I think that if you just normalize the situation first and ask, then you can, because the different ages do make a difference. But that is almost most of the battle, just acknowledging that there is this possibility that they could be struggling, or that they might need additional help for childcare or access, or just a couple of minutes to prepare for something. Those are actually pretty big things, but they're just the subtlest things.
I think it's also okay not to ask and just do. I brought a quote today because this woman's super powerful. And this particularly rang true, I think, for today, and in a panel on sovereignty. And so, can I share it?
Of course.
Traditionally, our women were respected and valued within our communities. Arising out of our roles as mothers, as the givers of life, the role of Indigenous women is to care for and nurture life once it is brought into the world, and by extension, to care for and nurture our nations. It's a quote from Kim Anderson in A Recognition of Being. And I thought that was really powerful because in thinking about the word sovereignty and thinking about what that meant as a mother was to think the freedom to make the choice, to self-determine, and the freedom to be a mother, to be an artist, to be a curator. And if we're invited to these spaces, then it should just be expected that we're going to be self-determining what we do in those spaces. And to not ask permission to bring our children because otherwise we wouldn't be able to attend is really important. And I think that we kind of did that with a residency that there was maybe, it was so ironic because the residency was about feminism. And the kids were maybe just not yet 2, and were invited to come to this residency. And I think we had to pay for the residency too. So we had to bring our kids. And I know that that was really disruptive for some people, and some people were upset, and we heard some snide comments about it not being a daycare. But it was like we're coming to do what we're paying to be a part of this residency and to be a part of these conversations. And then I think what happened organically in the 3 weeks that we were there is that other mothers started to bring their little ones, because it was like, well, I'm going to have to pay for daycare, or I'm going to really have to struggle to get here today to be a part of this. So we didn't ask permission, but we made it work, and I think we also helped other people self-determine their freedom to be there as well. And I think that was really powerful. That we did that. It was a gesture of sovereignty and a gesture of resistance in a strong, motherly way.
I think pay is also really entwined in that too, about because we know that most of the shows are held by male white artists, and so just in general, just like on broad spectrum. And so then it just starts to become even, the numbers start to get even lower depending which demographic you're looking at. But then because when you start to have a family, you already have such limited time. And so then you start to exit out of those other exhibitions and things like that. So I think you're already at a lot of disadvantages. I mean, the advantages is you have this wonderful life, but there are these other things against you. And because the CARFAC fees are great, to know that there's a standard, they're still very low in comparison. And so things like childcare or travel or accommodations with a kitchen are not always readily available. And I think food is also another thing that people don't think about a lot too, but food is such a nurturing thing. And what I love is like when I go on reserve, because I'm working on a lot of I'm working on building a lot of schools and community right now. Food was always a large part of that conversation and how I'm welcomed as a guest. And also I know I'm an original iHuman Youth member, I know a lot of the time in order to get youth there, it was always around food. And so I think that nourishment is also part of that, because we're just talking about different ages. Like, it's important to always make people feel welcome, and food is another good way to kind of provide that too.
I just have to say, this gallery, working with Carolyn, has been amazing. Thank you so much, miigwech, because it's been so amazing to bring our kids here, and especially a show that's mothering spaces. We're able to actually be with our kids and not have to struggle to try to bring them here too. That was just such a refreshing gesture coming from an institution. So thanks.
Yeah, I think just thinking about this nourishment and everything that you guys are talking about, I feel like that was really echoed throughout, my life growing up. My mom, who's non-Indigenous, but she did put a lot of effort since we grew up away from our community in northern Manitoba put a lot of effort into helping us build a community here in this city, and and I think that was really important, all that work that she put in. So I know my mom's from here, please. Thank you, Mom. Because it was really important for us too, to it kind of helped me get solidified, because I knew I belonged to something. And I really think the simple gestures of having coloring pages, well, I hope so anyways, also allows the kids to know that they belong in these spaces and that they're welcome here and that they should be comfortable here. And I think there's now that I have Juliana with me and I'm bringing her to a lot of places, those simple moments I've noticed have just really helped out, and she just gets excited instead of being like, oh, I don't want to go with you. She's like, we're going to a meeting, let's go, and she's ready to go with me, which is really helpful because then I don't have to fight with her the entire way there because she doesn't want to be there, and then I don't want to be there because I just don't want to have to force her into things she doesn't want to do, but at the same time I do need to be there in order to get that paycheck. It's just honest.
You also need to be in a state of mind for that meeting as well. So, because you'll bring the child and they have their own needs at the same time, and if they feel like they're losing that attention, they can be competing. And then that can be possibly terrifying and embarrassing sometimes for me, because I'm I have to derail from this conversation and focus on something else and then come back and then look like a professional. That does go through my mind sometimes. And so when people are so kind when they come, it establishes that they should be there, but that I should be there too. And then I can continue to do the work that I've been paid to do or been asked to do. And that is such a big part of that comfortability. Mm-hmm. Or you have to fight through it and then just not ask for permission, but just do it anyways until they get normalized to it.
I think those have a ripple effect. When I was thinking about the beginning of this exhibition and I was thinking about all of your guys' work, I really was really inspired by, by you guys, having a chance to get to know the Ephemerals while I was living in Winnipeg and seeing you bring these little ones and getting to see these little ones grow up a little bit and share these moments with you guys. And then Tiffany, when I met you, and I met you when you were pregnant with Jasper. So, and for me, that really had a ripple effect, and it made me feel more comfortable. When I decided to take on more of a role with Juliana and be here for her, it made me feel really comfortable to just be able to bring her in this space, because I knew even if there was challenges in place, there were other women doing this work, and I had a support system, even if it was a distance away from me, because there was other women doing it. And that just made me feel a lot more comfortable and solidified in my decision that, yeah, I can take on a role as a more hands-on auntie and help raise and nurture this child as she grows into a strong Indigenous woman. Mm-hmm. But I think something else that was kind of really is starting to really sit with me, Faye Heavy Shield brought up last night when we were talking, was that it is a privilege, and that we are privileged as artists and curators, writers, to have this space to be able to bring our children that a lot of people aren't or don't have access to. I don't know if you guys have any comments or thoughts on that, but it's made me really think about is there things we could be doing more nationally to support more mothers and a chance to, instead of dividing them or shaming them for working or staying at home, and help diminish that in some sort of way.
So I know when I was living here, I moved to Los Angeles and went to grad school there for architecture. And before that time, that's when I decided I was never going to have kids, because as soon as you have kids, in the way that I saw it, you either didn't like them just because of the area that I grew up, or not. I felt like you didn't like your children, or you had to hide away in your house and have a whole bunch of them, and then just never have a career, and then dislike your family, just because of the social constructs that I grew up in. So I knew people did ultimately love their children. It just, when you're playing around and you have to be quiet because the mother just had her stomach pumped, but you still have to play through the communities. There's those kinds of environmental situations that makes you just feel less wanted in that environment. So with that experience, I just felt like I didn't want to bring a child up in that environment, because then I felt like it would take away from my career, and I felt very driven to do things like architecture. And so when I worked in LA, they had only 3 months of maternity leave, which I thought was really difficult, because in Canada we have this year, and I just felt so sorry for these women. But then I also noticed that they were able to stay more competitive in the field because they came back to work more quickly, and that they loved their children, and that they loved their job, and that they were also still competitive in the field. And while I still don't agree with the 3 weeks or 3 months, whichever insurance you had, I began to see that the women didn't disappear, and that they could stay and thrive in the ideas that they had and be a mother. I'm not going to talk about how much they make people work in architecture or any of those other design fields, about what time you go to bed or things like that. I'm not going to talk about that because that's bullshit. But what is amazing was that I could see people were able to enter back to a space that they were once and still be welcomed. And so that's when I knew that I wanted to be that. And so I think it's really important to show your face or to show up with children, so that when other women decide to enter into that field, or women decide to facilitate that kind of environment, that they know that that's okay, or that that's just as important. And so I was talking to, because Carolyn, she used to work at the AGA. I can't remember her specific role, but she helped make sure that all the docents or the educators had all the right information, and she did this really great job of allowing me to come and talk about an exhibition that Otitsi had. And Jasper was like 5 months old or 3, he was like 2 or 3, 2 months old. And so I was like, he was screaming, crying during this. I was trying to give information, screaming, crying, and I had to like undress him fully and breastfeed at the same time in front of 30 strangers. And that was just such a, I knew that that was terrifying for me, but I knew that was important for them to see, because they were all really young and older demographic. And so it was just a really important statement. And Carolyn just made it such a comfortable environment for me to be in. It just was what it was. But if I was just at home and just let Erin do it or Becca do it, then I would have not had that opportunity to take up that space. So I think visibility is, along with Indigenous visibility, is kind of the most important thing.
I think that's a good point too, about sort of as a demonstration to younger women who maybe, like us, sort of thought like, I don't see myself in this motherhood role. But looking back on it and thinking, yeah, there were examples like Kathy Mattis, went to ACC conference with her when her son was just little, and just like you said, passing the baby around, like everyone there welcomed the baby. When she had to get up on stage, someone grabbed the baby, held the baby. Faye Heavy Shield coming to install at the Close Encounters exhibition and bringing her grandson, really, it was such a subtle thing, but really impactful to walk by that door and see her working on her piece and her grandson just playing. Like it's a reality of having your family there and having that family acknowledged. I think, and for me too, it's not just bringing children. I almost feel like I want to bring everyone. And my husband joined us on this particular trip because we have 2 kids, and I felt that that would be too overwhelming for me, and that it's not just about bringing my kids, but bringing an extra set of hands for those moments when you do need them to be put down for a nap, or you do need to go do something else. And we have Fran here as well, who's come to help us, and Jamie's husband's now joined us too. We really become a huge collective of people, and if I could, I'd bring my mom and my dad, and we'd bring your grandma. So let's work into the budget for the whole family to come next time. No, we don't have to go that far. But
I'd love to see that grant.
That acknowledging, though, of like that it's not just about kids, it's about a wider family. That is about a wider connection too, I think is really important. But we don't have to write a grant for like the aunties and uncles and cousins and everyone.
Well, but sorry, I know you're probably going to say something, but to take away that disconnect between work and life, like just to keep that connected together is really important, I think. And a lot of mothers have been doing this for a long time, but it's just not always the most conducive environment for that. So.
I remember being on it was a residency that was around reconciliation, and the organizers were really amazing, because my son was 8 months, and I was like, well, my mom said that she can come for a month to be with James, and so they're like, okay, well, we'll give you a bigger room. And then my Nana was traveling through. I'm like, do you think we could get a bigger room? Because my Nana is also joining us. And it was this idea about, like, the whole residency was around reconciliation. And they said, well, what a beautiful moment we have a whole intergenerational family, and 2 survivors of the residential school, and we see this kind of lineage. Let's bring them together and talk on a panel, like with your mom and your nana, and bring James along. And it was like this really amazing opportunity to be able to speak together and like dissolve those lines of life and work and family. But I just think as organizers, to be able to like normalize it and not have a certain set ideas of what also motherhood is, because there's so many different kinds of motherhood. And I remember like being pregnant and reading these terrible motherhood books that were just like, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this. And it was like, oh, this is so restricting. And there's just so many like Western ideas that are pushed so hard on people about what the best mother is or the motherhood practices. And so I think there's a lot of judgment on mothers to begin with, and to kind of dissolve that judgment onto other mothers is really important, and not to have this sort of set kind of idea of what that looks like.
Yeah, I guess being flexible, because everybody's mothering looks different, and everybody's kids' needs are different too. You know, some kids might need a little extra attention, you know. Now is, I think, a good time to open it up to the audience. Is there any questions from the audience? We can run the mic around.
Hello. I just had a question around how you grow with your children being in your work, and how you negotiate that as they're getting older, as they begin to have their own voices, to be to be an active participant. And like, you know, I hang out with you guys a lot, but
It's specific to the members of your collective. You're asking. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to answer first?
I mean, it's something that we have talked about as a collective, that we always want to make sure that the kids feel comfortable participating, and that has changed. I mean, they're little babies, you can't really ask them, like, do you want to be part of this? They're just always with us, and now that they are getting older and they have voices and they have opinions, I think with our performance, we had to talk to them, and I tried to explain to my daughter what we were doing. I said the word performance, and I think she envisioned like a ballet performance or something, so she was like, yeah, it would be great. But we did try and stay really open. Like, if you're comfortable with this, if you come up to it and you want to help feed people with us, you can do that. And then to be surprised that when we entered the performance, they all came with us and joined us was very intriguing, which I don't think
powerful.
was,
I think
yeah.
it was powerful.
And it wasn't a performance at that point. I think it was just kids wanting to be with their moms in a big unknown space with a lot of people around them, and they saw us entering a sort of picnic area, maybe is what it looked like to them, to make food, which again is nourishment and comforting, and to be able to sit next to your mom in this just seemed like the natural, normal thing for them to do. So I think there's that question of whether they fully know what we're doing, or if it's just this very authentic thing that they have connected with and they're happy to be involved with. And I'm sure that'll continue to change as they get older and they need less from us and they have more independence from us. I always joke that they're all going to become lawyers and accountants because they're just going to want to push away from all of this. But hopefully it does lend a nugget of something into their future. I love what Faye had been saying on the night of the opening about wanting to make it normal for her kids and her family to see art, that it's just part of everyday life. So it's fun to think about that for them as they grow, that this just becomes part of, their education, part of their life, part of their normal everyday thing, to be part of a creative process, an imaginative space. I I hope that carries them a long way, and I hope that they're happy to have been participants in that, and that they feel that they were willing participants, that we gave them that choice, even if at 5 and 6 they don't maybe fully grasp.
Yeah, that's really great. I really love that. But also, I think the moccasins that I put in there talk about a lot of things, because most of those are gifted to Jasper, which are really lovely, because that just talks about our culture in general, which is about gifting, and it's also about multiple hands making things for your child, which is just so important. Like, I haven't had to buy Jasper any clothes for this past year, really, because financially, but also I'm just really busy. And so even though he's wearing like Spider-Man and Batman clothes, which I really don't like, he really loves them. And that's kind of the important thing. But it's also about different techniques, those moccasins, because we all have different techniques of how we do things, especially in different locations. But it's also about, you know, my father passed away 3 months ago, just about 3 months ago, which was really difficult. And I was making the last pair of moccasins for him. And I wasn't sure if I was going to put them in the show or if I was just going to keep his feet warm in the winter. But then I found at a certain point that I couldn't carry on the knitting or the sewing anymore, because it was a grieving process for me while I was creating the moccasins, and so then I just left them. And I think that's also about just the work of motherhood in general. Sometimes you don't always finish these projects. You have like if you just go to your cupboard, there's probably like 8 projects that are just like in transition over the past year, and sometimes you just need to leave them. And so I was like, should I put this in the show or should I leave it? And I think it's also about, I know that we're talking about motherhood, but I couldn't have Jasper without another person. And the men in my family haven't always been the strongest examples. You know, my husband is actually quite wonderful, but it's always been really strong women in our family that have raised us. But you still always need that other component no matter what. And so I think it's just also to mark my father, which after he passed away, it was difficult for me because I felt like I had a third arm that I didn't know that existed, and then it was just gone. And so I think we have to also acknowledge the men that allow us to be who we are, so that we can continue to do the good work as well. So I think I'm just grateful for that process, that I could talk about all those things in representing something like the life of Jasper's moccasins in that work. But it also plays homage to my great-grandmother, who was a moccasin maker in Fort McMurray, which is something that all of my family always talks about. Like, that we all have really great memories about how she's gifted them to us, or my mother talks a lot about watching her beading when she was younger and things like that. So it's just like that collective memory. So it's really great to explore that through that work. So I was really grateful for this opportunity to exhibit those things, because I think, you know, as Indigenous people, when we see those things, we recognize them right away, but we'll know right away that they're different from different spaces. But then also for people who aren't used to moccasins, they'll know that these are moccasins and they're representative of possibly people who are Indigenous, but then they'll see that there are different things about them and they'll want to know why. So it's kind of interesting in that way, for me.
I think it's been really interesting working on the different curatorial projects that I've worked on, and arts projects on my own, and then with these amazing women that I get to work with. But also having conversations with my son about the exhibitions that I'm sometimes pulling him along to exhibition openings, and but also, you know, talking with him about what it means to be self-determined or making a choice. And so sometimes I don't get to go to openings because I'm like, do you want to come to an opening with me? And he's like, well, are there other kids there? And I'm like, I don't know. And he's like, not tonight. And so we won't be able to go that night if we can't find a babysitter. But there's also like that teaching to be self-determined, or teaching what a 6-year-old to a 6-year-old what it means to be a feminist. And hopefully instilling these kinds of values that our matriarchal family has taught me, and teaching him how to be a boy that is respectful to women. what it means to be Anishinaabe. And yeah, to have these conversations with a 6-year-old has been really helpful to my own practice, to be talking through what that means. So I think it's only really helped me or enhanced.
Bonjour, that's it. My name's Karen Pheasant, and so congrats to all of you on your work. It sounds really amazing. Your bios are impressive, lengthy, and a long journey. When I read the description for today, so my comments and or my question is more related to what stirred in my mind when I read about what today's presentation was about, and then hearing a bit of what each of you shared. Myself and a few of my Kokam peers that I sit with, we come from another generation. That even my children are way older than you guys. And so we come from the bra burning days, where bringing children at that time in the 70s was a different time period. As one of you mentioned, and maybe there's more of you, I'm not sure, I was raised by a residential school survivor, both my mom and dad. And because of social economic factors, a lot of women my generation, and I want to say it's a choice of luxury to say, I don't think I'm going to be a mother right now. Like that's really a luxurious choice. I had not one but 2 babies in high school and never finished high school, and then went along life. And then in that time period, when choice of occupation, my mother was a nurse, and now I'm a teacher, and so our choice of occupation was either a teacher or a nurse. And I don't mean a nurse practitioner, I just mean an RN, a nursing assistant. So what came to my mind when I seen this was Mothering Spaces is, and I forget, but the gal on the far right, that's so true of the new generation, such as myself. My mother tried to put me in some programs, and again, it's only if you have the financial freedom to do that. So I just went to the Girl Guides, which was free, and swimming, which was just above free, but so maybe just those 2 programs. But in my own parenting, my own mothering, it was taking my children to ceremonies, because all you needed was gas money and a jar of peanut butter and a loaf of bread. So I was wanting to hear, because you're navigating, and I come from Missing, which is the island in the Great Lakes, but now I've been in Edmonton for quite a few years, so I guess I'm officially an urbanite. And I've done Banff Center residencies, because it took it wasn't until I was 40 odd years when I stood in the center of a room after my dad passed away where I finally said, I am an artist, and did a bunch of residencies at the Banff Center. So you're the generation that are the bridging between that Indigenous knowledge, and now you're architects and curatorial masters, etc. I am still struggling, and now I'm a Gokam. This spring we'll have 8 grandchildren. So, and modeling in between, hanging on to walking that way of authenticity, integrity, ethics, and in survival mode, which still in survival mode. So any kind of comments as that bridging position you hold as a mother now? Miigwech.
Thank you for talking about that. I really do appreciate that perspective. Is it okay? I think about this a lot, actually, because when I was just at a construction meeting last week on reserve of one of the reserves, and one of the band leaders told me that their people are starving. And I knew that that was an accurate statement because they're watching a project go that's worth $22 million on their land with a construction crew that is bringing in people from outside of the reserve, and then they take the money back to their family that doesn't touch the reserve ever. And I think that there's great responsibility in these kinds of projects because it's building a school for the people there. But if there isn't the responsibility held at the highest level, all the way to the highest level with the people who are making the decisions with the financial authorities, such as the government, our office as an architecture firm, the construction crew, and the band working together, then these opportunities can't be afforded to the youngest and to the oldest in that community. And I think that those things are happening still in other places that aren't even able to have these conversations. And I think that there's that responsibility there to understand that while I have this position of this amazing job where there are only 5 Indigenous architects in Canada that are women, and knowing that it was illegal for Indigenous people to be architects up until 1968, that there is still a lot to move forward and push forward, but there are also all this great amount of work that has happened to allow someone like myself to have this position, to be in that room having those conversations. And so it's important to hear those perspectives so that I can continue gaining greater awareness about how decisions we make collectively impact so many people. And I was in another room talking about smudging guidelines for one institution, and there was 15 people in the room talking about what smudging is like or what fire alarms this would turn off, but I was the only Indigenous person in that room, and they were all making decisions for people who were non-Indigenous and then half of them also had never smudged either. And so there's this like, I find policy and politics really affect all of those spectrums that you were talking about, but they never themselves experience those factors themselves. And so then it makes it even more difficult for people to shift in and out regardless of where they are. And so I find my job ultimately fascinating because I really see the divide so specifically. I don't know if it answers your question, but that's how I translate that into a lot of the conversations that I have in that particular sphere. So I'm sorry if I hope I didn't devalue your contribution, but those are the things that I think about in conjunction with that.
Also, thank you for sharing and asking your question. And I think that there is a privilege in this generation, and I really feel like it's important to acknowledge histories and our privilege now. And I'm very lucky to have a very good relationship with my mother and my grandmother, and to talk about, they remind me that I'm privileged, and that's good. But they, hearing my Nana's experiences of having 7 children, and then basically telling her husband in Saugeen that she's going to borrow the car to go play bingo, and then leaving him and going to Brandon to go to university. And I can't imagine what my grandpa felt like when she just didn't come back from Brandon. And so he got a ride to Brandon and was like, "What are you doing, Mare? Why didn't you just tell me that you wanted to go to university?" And she said, "Well, because you wouldn't have allowed it." And so I think about these kind of fierce, this fierceness that they had to do. So I don't have that, and I really think about the fact that they had to actually go through all of that. And so I'm super privileged. But I also know that I can't teach my son how to speak Ojibwe because I didn't get to learn it. Because my mom was ashamed of being Ojibwe, and because she was taught to feel ashamed and taught to not know her language. So I'm so surprised when I cry. But I'm not crying because I feel sorry for myself. I'm just, it's just that I'm overwhelmed sometimes with these generations of women that really have paved the way for our generation, and I feel like I stand on the shoulders of some really powerful women and generations that made that happen and made us be able to be here on the panel to talk about what it means to be in sovereign spaces, but also to be super hyper aware of the fact that, you know, my Nana's speaking in our piece, and she's talking about the tradition or the teaching of burying the placenta to have create a good space and a good path for your kids. And I know that's what she's saying, but I can't actually recognize every single Anishinaabe word in that teaching. And so there is that gap, and there is this almost urgency in the responsibility to know about traditional knowledge and then to pass on what I know to the next generation. And to have a huge awareness that what I know is only half of what, or less than half of what my Nana could actually be teaching me, or her sister or her mother could have taught her. So the distilled kind of version of what I get is not even, you know, what is available or what was. So it's frustrating, I guess, in many ways, that my Nana is a full speaker and my mom understands and speaks, but she can't really, she teaches me words, and I hang on to those words and try to incorporate them in teaching my son. And so this morning, I called my mom to have a conversation with her before going on this panel, and I was like, what is it, the word, Anishinaabe word again for kids? And she taught me, and so we were going over and over, and my son thought it sounded really funny, and so he started speaking it. And I think it's just moments like that too that can, those sort of carriers of information, to be able to think that I could still be a carrier of information, of traditional knowledge. And I hope, you know, I have a responsibility to be able to do that because it's there in our family. So I don't know if that answered any kind of question, but yeah.
Don't you love it though, like when I would breastfeed all the time, a lot of women would always come to me and say, I fought for that, to do that in this space. And then I knew that what I was doing was okay and ordinary, but that was not something that was allowed. That was something I heard all the time when I was breastfeeding. And I think that made me feel stronger that I was benefiting from all of that work, that I could be in this space to do that rather than having to hide away. I love that a lot of women will always come and share that information, or even when people talk about how wanting, like when women discuss wanting to be a mother or not a mother, making that space okay too. Or even when they did have children and they didn't want to look after them because they had other things to do too, like that was pushed upon them. Or I think those are always really helpful to hear because it just tells you that there are different ways to think and do and be a person rather than a way that you always have to exist.
Hi. Well, I have a lot to say, so I'm going to condense it. But I do thank you so much for everything that I've heard here today as I return back to school as a mature student and mother about 4 years ago now. So I have two daughters. They are now 11 and 13. And just listening to you guys, I've had a lot of moments where I shied away from something because I just felt it wasn't an option, or I told myself it wasn't an option. So going forward, with that responsibility, having daughters as well, that just listening to you guys, it made me think, yeah, anytime I felt that I should push, because that is my personality, and kind of ignore the constrictions and all that stuff, that I should just keep doing what I'm doing as an example to my daughters for down the road, so that they also don't feel that they're ever restricted just because they're women or they eventually have children as well. So yeah, thank you for that. It just helps me to remember that, yeah, I'm not by myself in that kind of a journey, and just to keep pushing for it, like ignore where there's a restriction and see where I can, set an example for anyone. So yeah, thank you.
You're doing an awesome job then.
Do we have any more questions?
Tanse. Nikan mamotawi mo semanto na naskumak emigwa kumakotekiskao. I want to say thank you very much for your beautiful words and our great land and the recognition of where we are. We're on Treaty 6 territory. This is where our ancestors walked. And this is where our grandmothers taught us to be strong and resilient, and also to never give up. I want to say, as a single mother of 2 daughters, there was many decisions that I had to make in regards to mothering spaces in my journey of education, and they were always included, regardless of what others said. Made it a priority that they are included. Now I'm starting with my granddaughters. I have 2 of them, and I brought one with me today because I want her to see and witness from the great ladies, the younger generation, and decide that this is who I am. I'm First Nations, and I'm proud to be that woman, that Cree woman. And I want to say thank you very much for sharing. And when you're talking about your children, bringing your children to the spaces, I sat here and I wondered, what about the ones with 4 children? Will they be able to accommodate them? And I'm talking about my daughter. My daughter is home, and she's back to university, and she's got 4 little children. And there's a lot of times we have to juggle, her and I, and to ensure that she can attend what she needs to, and same with myself. And she's been my right-hand person in many things that I've done, hoping that she's attained and she's retaining the knowledge that I give to other people as well. So with that, you keep doing what you're doing. Like Karen said, we're in the same generation, and we struggled. We struggled with babysitting services, and still our children are still struggling. So where do we find a happy medium? And the work that you're doing, creating that space for your children, and the work that you do is excellent. This is what we need to do. Thank you very much.
I really do love what you're all saying, because like my mother is not here right now because she suffers from a kidney disease, and so she's not able to always be in these spaces. But she also has an acute awareness of other people, and it becomes difficult for her to enter those spaces. And so when I put pressure on her to be at a place to support me, it becomes even more difficult for her, because then it increases her sensitivity on that importance, and then she doesn't want to fail me, and then she ultimately doesn't end up coming. And so then I have to work really hard to make sure that she knows it's okay if she doesn't come, because I still feel supported. But I think it's also about those invisible barriers that people also put up inside themselves, because it is difficult to be in public spaces all the time. And she looks after 4 children, and she's in her 60s, and she's very ill. And I think a lot about my family when I'm working in my personal practice as an artist, as a curator, and as an architect, because they live on the fringe of poverty. And for me, that really keeps me grounded in the decisions that I make, because it is not easy for my mother to travel all the time, anywhere. And in those spaces, I want to make sure that she feels the most love that she had put upon me, because she never felt that growing up, because she never had those decisions. And I think that I'm just really grateful for this position and this platform to share those journeys, because it is just so incredibly difficult to get just through the day. And so I'm just really thankful for everything.
I feel like often when we've done projects, it feels like we talk a lot about our parents and our moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas. And I've often said about my curatorial practice that I should acknowledge that it's my mom and I in the practice. Because I can't go out to meetings and do stuff if she's not there to come and watch the kids for me. And I can't even begin to talk about my full range of identity and history without her identity and history, or my aunt's identity and history, or my grandma's identity and history. Like they're always there. And I'm the first one in my family to go to grad school, which felt strange and odd and huge fraud complex most of the time. And again, by the grace of my mom taking on an extra job to help pay for that and send money when I need it. I should probably put that in my bio. I should be like, and in parentheses, Jane Western, also curator. But that's a hard thing to talk about when you're in a setting that doesn't acknowledge what that would mean. And then you're supposed to be a professional and academic, and then you're also like, and my mom and my kids and all these other people. But that is the reality of trying to bring together that life, that professionalism. And I think that those thoughts about the generational differences are really important, and one I want to sit with and think about more. But there is something for me personally about being that first one to go into that graduate setting or enter that academic setting or a certain kind of professional setting where there wasn't always that encouragement to be a mom, and how I think that maybe is something that is in our generation that might be different. How do you do that? And that's why we're here, to talk about it.
Yeah, but also supporting them as an Indigenous child too, or as an Indigenous person, I think, because all of the trauma that we experience of identifying or not identifying, or how to represent your culture in a way that is authentic to you or your family, is such a barrier. And so I think that is, in the way that we talk about it, also so very important. It's difficult to say that you'll have these barriers because you look this way or because you think this way.
I think that's really important to, again, acknowledge different forms of knowledge too, like in these larger institutional spaces. And as a curator, like Indigenous contemporary curator at the Winnipeg Art Gallery, my sort of, first starting there, I wanted to form an advisory committee, and the advisory committee is of Indigenous curators and artists of different generations. And I felt it was really important to ask also my Nana if she could be on the advisory committee. She's a language speaker and advocate, and you know, she's this fierce woman, and nobody messes with Nana in Manitoba. So it was really awesome to be able to bring, to ask her to be on this advisory committee, because she has so much knowledge, but also to kind of shift this mostly white, structured institutional space to be able to say, we're having an elders council on this advisory committee, and we actually have to listen to these people because they bring so much knowledge in. And it was really empowering at some meetings to be like, wait, like, what does Nana think? Or what does Elder Harry think? And to be able to shift that and to say, like, they're the ones that say yes or no, or they are the ones to structure this meeting, and they can talk as long as they want to talk, has been really empowering. And yeah, just to think about different forms of knowledge, and that family can also be very powerful in a policy setting or in a meeting that not necessarily about family.
All right, well, we'll wrap it up here. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming out tonight and contributing to this conversation. Thank you to the panelists for, sharing like all your wonderful words and insight. I'm very inspired by you guys every day. So thank you for joining us. We're going to just take a little bit of a break, and then we'll get set up for the next panel. So grab a cup of coffee, tea, use the washroom, whatever you need, and we'll, 10 minutes? 15 minutes? At 3. Okay. Okay, thanks.